You pour the first cup of coffee before the house is fully awake. The light outside is still soft, that particular gray gold that belongs only to early morning, and without really deciding to, you drift toward the kitchen window. The feeder is already busy. A chickadee lands, tilts its head once to the left, takes a single seed, and is gone, all of it over in less than 2 seconds, then another, then a nuthatch, moving headfirst down the post in that way that still seems to defy something. Though you've watched it 100 times, you take a sip, you think, the birds are eating. But here's what's actually happening. That chickadee was watching your house before you woke up. It knows which window you usually appear at first. It has a working model of your schedule, when the feeder gets filled, how often you step outside, whether you're the kind of person it can trust, and every other bird at that feeder. Right now is operating inside a social order so specific, so layered, that researchers spent decades just beginning to map it. You thought you were watching birds eat breakfast. You were never just watching birds eat breakfast. There are 7 things that happen when you feed backyard birds every day, and not one of them is what you'd expect. Most people think of feeding birds as a one-way transaction. You give, they take, they leave. Simple, clean, pleasant, a small act of generosity that asks nothing in return. It isn't that. The moment you commit to filling that feeder every day, same spot, roughly the same time, consistent supply, you don't just attract birds, you initiate something. A process that operates on its own logic, follows its own rules, and produces consequences that ripple outward from your yard in directions you've never thought to look. Before a single bird lands at your feeder, it has already made a series of calculations. Is this location safe? Is this food source reliable? Has anyone else been here and survived? Every landing is not an act of appetite, it's the conclusion of a risk assessment. The bird is not just hungry, it is deciding whether the benefit of the food outweighs the danger of exposure, the vulnerability of standing still in the open while a predator might be watching. And here's what changes everything. It is also deciding whether you are trustworthy. Cornell Lab of Ornithology researchers, through the long-running project FeederWatch, now tracking over 100,000 feeder sites across North America, have documented something that should stop you mid-sip. Birds don't just respond to feeders, they respond to feeders maintained by specific people. Individual birds recognize human faces. They distinguish between the person who fills the feeder and a stranger who approaches the same feeder. They make different behavioral choices. Based on that recognition, you are not anonymous to the birds in your yard, you have a reputation. And everything that happens next, the 7 things I'm going to walk you through, flows from the moment those birds first started building a picture of who you are, how reliable you are, and whether your yard is worth the risk. They've already started. They started the first day you put food out. The only question is what they've decided about you so far. Here's the first surprising thing that happens when you feed birds every day. Within 72 hours, they begin restructuring their morning around you. Not metaphorically, not loosely, measurably, specifically. The resident birds nearest your yard, the chickadees, the nuthatches, the titmice, begin adjusting the timing of their foraging circuits to align with when your feeder is freshest, fullest, and safest. Before the end of the first week of consistent feeding, their arrival times at your feeder stop being scattered and start clustering. They are no longer arriving when they happen to be hungry. They are arriving when they have calculated, based on accumulated observation, that your feeder will be at its best. Behavioral ecologists call this time-place learning, the ability to associate a specific location with a specific time of day and to return to that location on an internal schedule. It is well documented in laboratory settings, but what's remarkable is how quickly it appears at ordinary backyard feeders, in wild birds, triggered entirely by the simple consistency of a person who fills a tube feeder every morning before work. Watch your feeder for 3 consecutive mornings at exactly the same time. You will likely see the same individual birds, not similar birds, the same ones, arriving within a narrow window of minutes. They are not wandering past and noticing food. They are keeping an appointment that you, without realizing it, scheduled with them. Now here is where it deepens. If you miss a day or shift your routine by an hour, you will often see birds arriving at the old time. They land on the perch, they look around, they wait for a beat that feels, if you're watching closely, almost like puzzlement. And then they leave, not in the scattered dispersal of disinterest, but in the specific, searching departure of something that expected to find what it didn't. They are not forgiving, and they are not fragile. They will adjust, but for those first few visits after an inconsistency, they are checking, they are holding your reliability. up against their expectations of it. The scout in all of this is almost always the chickadee, black-capped or Carolina, depending on where you live. These small birds are the first to establish the pattern and the first to communicate it. Once a chickadee has coded your feeder as reliable at 7 in the morning, it begins routing others. It doesn't announce it in any way we'd recognize as language, but other birds watch it. They follow its movements. Its presence at the feeder is itself a signal. This is safe. This is worth it. This is real. If you've been inconsistent, filling the feeder when you remember, skipping weeks at a time, you haven't lost them, but you haven't yet given them enough consistency to build the pattern. They haven't been able to trust you yet. The good news is that 72 hours of reliability is enough to begin. The second surprising thing is this: your feeder doesn't just feed individual birds, it creates a society. This sounds like an exaggeration. It isn't. The moment a reliable food source appears in a landscape, it becomes more than a feeding station. It becomes a gathering point, the kind of fixed, shared location around which complex social behavior organizes itself. And the social behavior that organizes around your feeder is far more intricate, far more hierarchical, and far more consequential than anything happening at the surface level of birds eating seeds. There is an order to who lands where, and it is not random. Blue jays displace almost every other species simply by arriving there. Size and their confidence clears the platform before they've taken a single seed. House finches defer to goldfinches at certain feeder types, while aggressively displacing sparrows at others. Mourning doves, large as they are, yield to nearly everyone. They are patient, ground-feeding birds who wait for what falls, who have learned that conflict is not worth the energy. Every species has a position in this arrangement. Every individual bird within each species has a position too, often determined by age, sex, and the subtle social math of who arrived in this territory first. This isn't aggression in the way we usually mean it. It is a negotiation. It is a live, ongoing settlement of who gets what, when, and at what cost, and your feeder is the stage where that negotiation plays out every single morning. Research from the British Trust for Ornithology adds another dimension. The result is that birds spend significantly more time near your yard, and more time near your yard means more time pair bonding, more time singing, more time visible at your window. It also means less exposure to predators in unfamiliar terrain. Birds with access to reliable feeders, the research found, show measurably higher winter survival rates, not just because of the calories, but because of the reduced risk that comes with knowing where the food is. There is also something happening at your feeder that researchers have only recently begun to appreciate fully. Your feeder is an information exchange. Chickadees, those same scouts who learned your schedule, use a complex vocabulary of calls that encode specific information about predators. What kind, how large, how immediate the danger. Other species in the vicinity decode these calls in real time. When the chickadee signals all clear, the jay moves in. When it shifts to alert, every bird within earshot recalculates. Your feeder has become a communication node in a local network that extends well beyond what you can see from your window. And there's one more thing. When you attract chickadees consistently, you are not only attracting chickadees, nuthatches, brown creepers, golden-crowned kinglets, downy woodpeckers. These species travel in mixed flocks during winter, using chickadees as sentinels and navigators. By building a relationship with one species, you have quietly extended an open invitation to an entire community. Right now, the birds that left your feeder an hour ago are still nearby. They haven't wandered far. Your yard has become the center of their day. Now let's talk about what happens on the worst nights. A black-capped chickadee weighs roughly 10 grams. On a clear, cold winter night, the kind where the temperature drops below zero and the wind moves through the branches, that bird will burn through nearly 10% of its total body weight just to survive until morning. It is not sleeping the way you sleep, it is shivering continuously all night in a roost cavity the size of a fist, metabolizing every calorie it stored during the day just to maintain a body temperature that keeps its heart beating. What it found at your feeder yesterday afternoon is not a supplement. On nights like that, it is the margin. A study published in the Journal of Avian Biology followed marked chickadee populations through multiple winters, comparing birds with reliable feeder access to birds in comparable habitat without it. The birds with feeder access showed winter survival rates up to 69% higher, not slightly better, not modestly improved, 69%. For a 10-gram bird facing a 17-hour night in sub-zero air, your feeder is not a kindness. It is a measurable intervention in whether that bird sees morning. Now pull back, widen the frame. There are approximately 59 million households in North America that feed backyard birds. Americans alone spend around $4 billion annually on bird food, making it the second most popular wildlife hobby in the country, behind only gardening. Cornell's FeederWatch program actively tracks more than 100,000. Of those feeding sites, the birds moving through your yard right now are, in all likelihood, part of a documented population that researchers are watching. Your feeder is one node in a network of continental scale. And during spring and fall migration, the birds that visit aren't only your residents. They are travelers, birds moving from wintering grounds in the Gulf Coast toward breeding territories in Canada, stopping briefly to refuel before continuing north. They were at someone else's feeder in Tennessee yesterday. They may be in Vermont. Tomorrow, your yard is a way station on a journey that covers thousands of miles, and the seeds in your feeder are part of what makes that journey possible. 3 more things happen when you feed birds every day, and they arrive in quick succession. Over generations, consistent feeders select for birds that are bolder and more comfortable around humans, gradually shifting the temperament of local populations. Birds in established, predictable feeding environments show measurably lower levels of stress hormones than birds in unpredictable ones, and you, the person at the window, experience documented reductions in anxiety, improved attention, and a measurable increase in reported well-being simply from watching them. The benefits, it turns out, have never only run one direction. So let's hold all of it at once. Let's look at what we actually know now. We know that within days of consistent feeding, birds reorganize their mornings around your schedule, keeping appointments you didn't realize you'd made. We know that your feeder becomes a social institution, a place where dominance is negotiated. Pair bonds are maintained, information about predators is exchanged, and entire mixed species communities gather because one small bird found something it could rely on. We know that resident birds contract their territories around your yard, spending more time visible, more time safe, more time singing. We know that on the coldest nights of winter, what you left in the feeder yesterday afternoon is the difference, for some of those birds, between surviving until sunrise and not. We know that your yard is not a local pocket of nature but a node in a system that spans a continent, visited by migrants, tracked by scientists, woven into journeys that cross thousands of miles of sky. And we know that the act of watching this, of standing at the window with your coffee and paying quiet attention, is doing something measurable to you as well. That is not a small thing, none of it is small. But I want to say something that goes beyond the science, because the science only tells part of the story. There is a reason that feeding birds feels different from other hobbies. It feels different because it is different. You are not collecting something. You are not performing something. You are entering into a relationship, a real one, with real stakes, with creatures that are genuinely responding to your presence, your consistency, your reliability. They are not symbols of nature, they are nature, and they have let you in an era when most of us spend most of our days entirely insulated from the living world, temperature-controlled, screen-mediated, scheduled down to the minute. There is something quietly radical about maintaining a small patch of ground where something wild depends on you, where something with feathers and hollow bones and a heart the size of a pea has incorporated you into its survival plan. Every morning you've filled that feeder, you have been participating in something ancient, something mutual, something that predates your house, your street, your city, and will continue in some form long after all of it is gone. You thought you were doing a small thing, you were never doing a small thing. Come back to the window. The coffee is still warm, the light has shifted now, fuller, brighter, the morning properly underway. The feeder is there, the way it's always been there, but you are not looking at it the same way you were 20 minutes ago. Watch what happens in the next 60 seconds. The chickadee that arrives first sees how it lands and pauses before it takes anything. That pause is not hesitation, that is the sentinel behavior of a bird that has learned to be first, which means it has learned to be fast enough and careful enough to hold that position. It earned the first landing. Now watch the second bird. Does it land immediately? Or does it sit for a moment in the branch just off to the side, close but not committing yet? That is the risk assessment in real time. That bird is reading the body language of the first bird to confirm that it's safe. It is not being timid, it is being intelligent. And the jay, when it arrives, watches everything else shift, not in panic, in acknowledgement. The social order, renegotiated in a fraction of a second without conflict, without a single sound. You know how to read this now. You didn't this morning, tomorrow, before you check your phone, before you look at the news, before the day gets its hands on you. Spend 3 minutes at your window, just 3. Count the seconds between the first arrival and the second. Notice who waits in the branches before landing and who goes straight to the perch. Notice whether the same bird claims the same spot 2 mornings in a row. You are watching a society, you are reading a language, and the more mornings you give to it, the more fluent you become. I want to know something from you. In the comments, tell me, what is the first bird at your feeder in the morning? Not just the name, what does it do when it arrives? Does it land and eat immediately, or does it sit and look around first? That behavior tells you something specific about where it sits in the hierarchy, and I'd love to hear what you're seeing. If you want to keep going, to keep pulling back the surface of what looks ordinary and finding what's underneath, there's more here waiting for you. The world outside your window has always been this complex. You're just finally starting to see it.